Hi guys. So, in talking about my overall reflection of this past semester in this diversity seminar, I'd have to start with the fact that I was very intimidated walking into a room with a bunch of seniors and juniors who knew a lot more about psychology than I did and still do. But I can say that this feeling at least was overshadowed, not completely gotten rid of, but at least overshadowed by the fact that every class, every time class was held, the thoughts were always profound. This is in terms of multiple perspectives, in terms of new theories, and I think part of this was due to the fact that the classroom, to me at least, was diverse in terms of nationality. And coming from a public school, I didn't really have that experience. But yeah, I feel like whatever you guys had to share was always eye-opening. It was always something to reconsider. It sometimes was something like, hey, this is a Western concept, and it burst that bubble. It made you think more outside of your own culture. But besides this also were the really great studies. I was learning about the basics of psychology, and I was also learning about things that were recently being developed in psychology. So, some of the studies I did really enjoy were the Fain and Spencer paper, which kind of looked at prejudice and self-maintenance. And that's a prime example of basically how I had ideas about things, and you have this kind of fundamental idea of how the world works, but it's never exactly put into words. And when it is put into words, it makes sense. And that was one of the papers for me where it seems like it makes sense for prejudice to be something that does help with self-maintenance or self-esteem. Another study that I really liked was the looking at biological conceptions of race and how that affects motivations to cross racial boundaries. And I remember someone was talking about how this might have had effect on stereotype threat. And I also really love the connections that were being made in class. Part of this is what inspired me to make a connection between stereotype threat and intersectional visibility, which is something that Valerie has done a lit review on very recently, and something that I was really awesome just to me, as well as stereotype threat. And I wanted to look at basically how having multiple, or being a part of multiple subordinate groups, can itself be its own experience, and how there might be advantages to this as well. A lot of studies on stereotype threat seem to pinpoint people with multiple subordinate group identities as people who experience a cumulative amount of oppression from both subordinate groups. However, based on statistical findings that show that Black women are the most educated by race and gender, in terms of who goes to college, despite the fact we're not going to talk about the colleges they may be going to, but that fact alone made me think about how basically susceptibility to outright oppression based on being a prototype can affect people who are the prototype in different ways from those who have multiple subordinate group identities. So in this case, for Black women, how not bearing the brunt of the most explicit or outward oppression may give them the ability to be successful in other ways, as well as not having one identity to rely on and one identity to blame for, well, not blame, but one identity to look at in terms of how you identify. So that was one of the things I really was interested in looking at. But overall, also looking at culture threat and mental illness, and how depending on what culture you're from, and this goes into interdependent and independent societies and cultures, which is another thing that just amazed me to learn. I was just awestruck by everything basically this semester. But yeah, talking about that and how depending on what culture you're from, the rights of people who have mental illness in terms of their rights to marry or their rights to reproduce, how that changes depending on where you're from. And that also inspired me to look at how that could be changed, in terms of, because there's a lot of closeness or interdependence in independent or Eastern Asian cultures, at least for the most part. You kind of get a lot of closeness, and how that might change stigma, or how this closeness could change stigma of mental illness if, you know, this person was in close relation to them. I mean, and these are just some of the ideas that I had, but I mean, overall, I mean, I loved all the studies. I think I need a little more experience reading more studies so I can learn how to pick out which ones are my utmost favorite and what makes a paper bad. You guys often gave me the experience of helping me understand what a good paper looks like, when you critiqued it and spotted things that I didn't consider previously. But I guess that's really all I have to say. And thank you, Valerie, and to all of you guys for giving me, overall a very eye-opening experience. Something that I loved every second of the class. And I guess that would be my overall reflection of this class. Bye.